All right. Good morning, good evening. I'm Ted Snyder, Dean of Yale School of Management, and it's a really important day for us. I noted yesterday when we opened up the symposium that yesterday was the 200th anniversary of the publication by David Ricardo of a chapter on foreign trade that first explained the theory of comparative advantage, which is one of the four founding principles that underlies our work at the Global Network. But it's really great to have everyone here. I am delighted to welcome Frances Mccall Rosenbluth. Frances is my colleague here at Yale. She's the Damon Wells Professor of International Politics at Yale University. She's a comparative political economist. She has interests in a wide variety of topics, but most relevant for today, the political economy of gender. So I'm going to truncate Frances's resume, but she received her PhD from Columbia in political science. She also spent time during her PhD work at the University of Tokyo. And Frances led the effort that has generated these results that we will go through in some detail, but not in sufficient detail. So for those of you who want to go deeper into these results, I would encourage you to consult the Global Network for Advanced Management website or the Yale SOM website, where the full set of results is replicated. Before we go further, I want to make clear that this is a conversation, not a presentation, and I'm delighted to welcome our friends and colleagues from Yale Center Beijing. And I'd like to introduce Carol Lee Rafferty. Carol is the executive director of the Yale Center Beijing, and Carol is just wrapping up it looks like an amazing discussion at Yale Center Beijing in Chaoyang District. And Carol, maybe you'd like to say hello and identify a few people who are there at Yale Center Beijing. Carol.
Sure. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Here at Yale Center Beijing, we have a sold-out crowd, and two of our wonderful alumni. One is Yilu Zhao, who was CFO for one of the largest online travel companies in China and now runs her own fund. We also have Zhu Ying, an SOM graduate, who now heads up Phoenix TV's entertainment unit. She's their CEO. And for the past 45 minutes, we had a heated discussion about Frances's, Professor Rosenbluth's report, as well as the role of women in the global workforce. So we would love to continue this discussion across the, Pacific. We're here in Beijing, 12 hours ahead of New Haven.
Great. We look forward to that discussion as well.
I'm wandering around because we're picking up some ambient sounds. But Carol, thank you. Good morning, good evening, as I said to everyone. And let me give you a little background, and we'll show you this one slide to basically get us started. And Frances, you've been at this work for a while. Is there anything striking or noteworthy about this survey?
Well, what's really exciting to us about this survey, and I hope it will be exciting to you as well, is the global reach of our respondents. So many people and from so many countries. Almost all the studies on the gender wage gap is country by country, and this allows us to use the same questions over so many countries.
But this wasn't really focused on the wage gap per se, was it?
Well, women in the workforce more broadly, but for those of you who took the survey, I don't know if anybody in this room saw it in its original form, nowhere on the survey did it say women anything, because we didn't want people to say, aha, they're looking for us to affirm women in the workforce. So every time we see would you promote this person? Woman, yes. That's called social desirability bias, and it completely skews results. So
So it was completely camouflaged or embedded somehow in the survey?
that's right. So what we did instead was to call it a survey about the global workforce, leadership in the global workforce. And one of the techniques to smuggle past
You're so deceptive.
it's acceptable by the IRB, the Institutional Research Board. They let us do this. Because we want people to say what they really think, we allowed the respondents to see and choose between candidates with randomly scrambled attributes, including gender. So in some cases, they might have 2 women, where other attributes vary, such as amount of time spent in the office, or whether or not you see how productive they are, years of experience, and so on. And so gender wasn't triggered as the variable that they should focus on.
But it was structured so that how people extracted signals was revealed to include gender.
That's
Is
right.
that a fair?
That's exactly right. We wanted to see how people think about gender without consciously doing so.
Cool. So when I saw these results, my reaction was great clarity around a phrase that we use in the United States, and that's catch-22. Catch-22 is basically the idea that if you do something, it's not going to work, and the failure is sort of built in. You just can't get out of the confines of the box. And maybe the box here has a glass ceiling. But let's go to some of the findings, and I think this is one that goes directly to this issue of signal extraction.
That's right. So this to us was really a stunning finding, that when employers or would-be employers can't see the productivity of an employee, they will look instead at how long that employee is in the office.
And that's the left-hand side?
That's the left-hand side, availability around the clock. So people who are available to do work around the clock are preferred to those who are not. That is, until their productivity is observed, and that availability around the clock, as you see in the second histograms, diminishes by a striking amount. So catch-22, exactly, that if a woman is expected to do work in the family, and this time that they are no longer spending in the office because they're expected to spend it in family work, puts women in a double bind, because they, on the one hand, have family obligations that disallow them from spending that time in the office. They may be very productive. They may actually find ways to work around their family obligations, or they may even not be the kind of woman who has lots of family obligations, but the fact that the expectation is that they have family obligations puts them in this position of being less likely to be promoted.
And you've already brought up, I think, the other key insight that forms the catch-22, which is, let me go to this issue. Is this the right?
Yes, that's
the flip side of this?
Yes, that's exactly right. So on the one hand, firms require availability around the clock. On the other hand, firms and society more generally expects women to bear disproportionate responsibility, not only for child care, but also for elder care. So this is a lifetime of obligation.
So this is one manifestation of divergent expectations. It's mothers, but it could be household, it could be elder care.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's right. And can I just say, Ted, because you mentioned David Ricardo and comparative advantage, Ted used to be at the University of Chicago, and Gary Becker, who won a Nobel Prize for the economics of the family, pointed out that maybe there's comparative advantage to the woman staying at home for the household. And this apparently is widely believed. And it's not that it's economically wrong, it's that the distributional costs of that division of labor fall on the woman such that she is not in the same position in the labor market as the male who is in the marketplace full time.
So spring 1976, I was in Gary's class when he developed that model. Francis and I hadn't planned on talking about this, but he said, suppose there are two people and they're a couple, and one is female, and there's some likelihood that the female will be taken out of the workforce for even a short period of time. What are the implications for investment in human capital and comparative advantage? I'll just note, in defense of Gary, who I adore, also pointed out that the returns to human capital are such that you get the vast majority of returns in a relatively short period of time. So this difference is, in his model, is no doubt correct, but it's a small difference. And if we let this overcome all, or determine everything, there are a lot of unfortunate implications.
That's right. And I think Gary was probably right in a strict economic sense that there are increasing returns to human capital. So if you do interrupt your career, and note that most careers really ramp up during what are, for women, the reproductive years, this short interruption can be quite costly.
And am I correct that there's a potential additional insight that it's exactly early in the career, early when you're in a job, when the signal extraction is going to be more likely to be on the left-hand side, and for women that's also going to sometimes at least match with, I'm going to start a family, am I going to become a mother?
That's right. So particularly in those early years when their productivity is less well understood or revealed is when women are the most vulnerable. And those of you in the room who've done research in related areas probably know that there's quite a lot of variation across industries. Within finance, for example, if you're a member of a group, it may be very hard to ascertain what part of the productivity, the profit, came from any particular individual in the group. And this poses a real problem for assigning the reward to the people in the group. Whereas if you are a trader and you're doing it on your own, that productivity is more clearly visible. So we would expect the gender wage gap, the statistical discrimination, the promotion rates to vary by these kinds of factors, the visibility of productivity.
We've got some people in the row right here who have some insights into these issues, and I'm going to try to get some other voices included, and then soon we'll also get back to Beijing. But I wanted to introduce our guest from University of Cape Town, Kutwana Ramaboa, and I'm just wondering, given your perspective in South Africa, and seeing all the changes in South Africa, but also the ongoing challenges, what's your reaction to this presentation? And do you think that these insights apply to South Africa?
Yeah, they do. It also depends, though, on whether you are in the urban or rural area, because perceptions differ there depending on how modern society has become. So I think this applies globally. I don't think it's just exclusive to the MBA students. It applies to everybody.
And Juan Pablo Mura from IGADE Tec de Monterrey, you had long experience in the private sector working for McKinsey, and now you head up this amazing business school and university in Mexico. How about in Mexico?
I fully agree. I mean, the issue is as valid, if not more relevant in Mexico, in Latin America. the case for action is not only the good thing or the moral thing to do, but it's also a good business. And as you were saying, McKinsey published a report last year in which they surveyed 350 public companies in 6 countries in Latin America. Only 8% of the positions in executive teams are held by women, and only 5% of board members are women. So the starting point is even lower than in Europe and the US. So the benefits and the case for action, I would say, is even greater. And I think the reasons are similar, but probably more marked in Latin America. The same study marked that in the case of Mexico and Latin America, women do 3 times more work at the households than men, and that's a huge double burden that's preventing them.
Wow. Chikyun from AIM in the Philippines, you've also had perspective across Asia because you and the U.S., you studied in the U.S. at University of Minnesota. Your family background is Korea, and you're now in the Philippines. So what's going on in terms of the Philippines or your overall perspective?
Philippines is an interesting case because if you look at last 10, even 20 years of data, for example, UN studies, you will see Philippines ranks pretty well, normally within top 5 when it comes to women in middle to senior management roles. I haven't seen a lot of credible reasons as to why that is the case. I can guess some of the reasons. For example, it's a very large family society, so they have a lot of support from grandparents, which will allow women to work. Also, if you're a middle to high income family, it's not unusual at all for you to have a nanny, a cook, a driver, and a gardener. So it allows women to take jobs outside. We have, even at AIM, we have a lot of single mothers with child being taken care of by their mothers, and they work. On the other hand, if you go to the top level, CEOs, boardrooms, you still have the same issues in that very few women in the boardroom level, very few women as CEOs at a top position. So I think to a degree, I think even though some of the statistics are favorable in the Philippines, you see a lot of differences. And I have left Korea many, many years ago, more than 30 years ago. But I think it's changing, but still there are lots of differences. And what I would be very interested in looking at stats like that is to see what differences you will observe depending on how you segment the data. So I know when I talk to people in 20s, 30s, and 40s, they all have very different ideas in terms of what their role is. Divorce rate, for example, is very, very high now compared to the days when I was growing up. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that women now have economic ability. So the days of women remaining in the family because they have children and the only way they feel they can support children is to stay married is no longer the case. So I think looking at the data from one slice, you may get a simplistic idea, but when you start slicing data in different segments, I think the situation is actually a lot more complicated.
So I think we've had a couple of observations now that what we see in various workplace environments is actually quite similar in that you get a greater proportion of women who get into these tracks, but then that proportion gets smaller each step of the way up. And we've done some analysis about what our own business schools look like, and we see that. We see executive MBA, fewer percentage of women. In the very high level non-degree programs, even less. When we look at the faculty, it's more balanced in the junior ranks. And then what you're, I think, have said is that you see this in lots of other sectors as well. And I wanted to ask my friend Dominique from IMD, you run one of the largest, most successful executive education programs in the world, in addition to offering degree programs, but you deal with companies all the time who are trying to get better performance, build out their teams, leverage the people that they have. Are there any new ideas out there to address this?
I'm not sure that there are new ideas. I think that what we see, and we are based in Europe, and obviously Europe is a geographical term because a lot of differences between, let's say, Scandinavia, where you see a lot of women in top position, boards and CEO position, while if you go to the Mediterranean side of Europe, then the numbers of women in top position, diminish dramatically. So now what we have done is actually, I saw that you have a very similar program to what we have, which is we develop a special program for women in leadership that has been extremely successful. And that brings, I would say, people from everywhere. So what is interesting when you look at who attend this type of program, there is no, I would say, discrimination in one type of, I would say, geography rather than the other. You see people coming from everywhere. So there is a conscious, I would say, view in Europe overall that, more women needs to be, encouraged to go into top management position. In some countries like France, for example, now there is a law that forces companies to have a certain quota of women in a board. And this has been very, very controversial, as you can imagine. So Europe is very contrasted.
I wanted to ask Carol in Beijing maybe to comment and the percent of respondents who said that candidate availability around the clock was likely to be promoted when productivity information was not given. So this is the situation where you don't have a lot of person-specific insights.
That's right.
And when we look at these results, China's on the lower end. It's not the lowest, but I'd be interested, Carol, if you or any of your distinguished guests have comments about, is China different in any way from other parts of the world based on your experience there and elsewhere?
Well, I'll let our guests, Julia and Ilu, speak more on this, but what I gleaned from our earlier discussions happening in Beijing is that because, back in the 70s, Mao said women should be holding half the sky, many of us grew up with mothers who worked full time. And so it's not an issue about whether women should work and continue their careers throughout their lives. It's not a question, it's a must. I think that could be one of the explanations for kind of the surprise in the statistics. And I'll get Ilu and Julia to speak more.
Okay, maybe I'll take this question first. Hi, Professor Snyder and Professor Rosenbluth. My husband actually has a degree from Yale in comparative political science in '99, and he was a research assistant in the summer of '98, and then later on went on to Yale Law School. You actually wrote a recommendation letter for him. He graduated in '02, and then worked for Sullivan Cromwell. And he was an associate in New York for Sullivan Cromwell for a number of years. Really didn't like it, and so I've known you for a long time. And anyway, to take up this question, earlier we were discussing that. It was never an issue that crossed either my mind or Julie's mind, if I understood you correctly, that there's a difference between academic difference or intellectual difference or capability difference between men and women as we were growing up. Regardless of what we think of Chairman Mao, I think he actually did a decent job in terms of leveling the playing field for women. And everybody's mother worked. It was never an issue that was raised at school. Boys are better at math, boys are better at science. Any of those things never really became an issue in front of me until I actually reached Yale. When I reached Yale, it was like feminism. I was interested. And then it seems like generations of women before us worked toward greater equality, whereas it was taken more or less as a given in China. I mean, at least when I was growing up, that was in the 80s and in the early 90s. It was just really not an issue.
So may I interrupt and just get another point in play here? So it was never an issue. Now, what about the rest of Asia? Of course, Asia's all alike, right? I mean, it's just one big homogeneous part of the world. Let's explore this a little bit. Let's see, I wanted to get one more slide. Here we go. This was the other side of the so-called catch-22. What percent of childcare do you think should be the mother's responsibility? So within Asia, we have China having not a big share, I mean, compared to 50-50. But Japan, within East Asia, pops out as being somewhat higher, especially the 71% versus 59%. So Kaz, Hitotsubashi is our global network school in Tokyo, and what do you think about this?
Yeah, actually, this is kind of the reality, but the things began to change. Maybe 2 years ago, the Prime Minister Abe defined the increase of the number of the female employees as the number one agenda for companies. The companies got a strong pressure from the government, so they began to increase the number of the female managers, female officers, but still they are the minority, but things began to change.
So, okay, you know me, you were good friends, we played golf together and stuff like that. Was the president's motivation mainly to focus on the demographic issues in Japan, and it was forced rather than
the Japanese population is decreasing, so we have to get the more kind of jobs. The employment coming from jobs should be done by the female or the business leaders. Otherwise, it's not sustainable.
And
so
then,
therefore, the demographic issue is one of the reasons for these policy changes. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I think people began to change their mindset.
yeah.
So therefore, the more kind of the equal opportunities for the female people.
So what you're suggesting is that there has been an acceptance of this rather than resistance.
Yeah.
It was alluded to that maybe the French version of this, the law that it has to be 50-50 on boards is meeting with some resistance. You're saying this is actually being fairly well received in Japan?
Yeah, it is. So the people showed kind of the acceptance, and the people began to change their mindset. Maybe things may be taking time, but definitely it will be changing. So that the more kind of the opportunities for female people, so we are going to see the increased number of the female officers. So it's happening.
Could I say just one thing here?
Absolutely.
So I think what all of you say is right, that the ability of a woman to supply her labor is key. Therefore, childcare, government subsidized childcare, or regulations that make it possible for firms to offer a lot of cheap childcare, all of those things are important. But there also has to be demand for female labor. And if females are expected to interrupt their careers And particularly if a firm is structured around, let's say, long-term labor contracts where a career interruption is costly, it's in those places where the demand for female labor is going to be slower to come around. And so government policies to the effect of, forcing them to hire somebody, or perhaps more effectively, rather than giving them an unfunded mandate to say, you have to hire women, because firms will find ways not to do that, maybe there has to be some kind of recognition that if you want women to balance family and career, so it's not just that they want women in the workforce, it's that they want women to be in the workforce and to have babies. How do you do that? You can only have both of those things if a woman is sure that she can be in the workforce, have a baby, go back into the workforce without dramatically losing her trajectory. So the government ideally would recognize all of those unintended consequences of policies and put some heft behind it in the way of maybe subsidies or tax breaks for firms that do have higher demonstrated demand for female labor.
So you use the term costly interruption.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you also pointed out that interruption may be purposeful in terms of having a child.
Mm-hmm.
That's a perfect segue for me to ask Kathy Harvey from Said. And Kathy, you've actually experienced interrupting your career and then trying to get traction after having children and a family. And you're from the Said Business School at Oxford, so maybe you could respond maybe at a personal level, also with some insights about UK.
Yeah, I think I often tell the women who are on our programs, don't worry, I'm on my 4th career. And I think women do have, and I say that women do have some advantages, that you have to interrupt your career, but then you can reinvent yourself. And women just need the confidence to do that, to reinvent themselves. And we mentioned, and I noticed that your women's program was happening this week at Yale. You have one at IMD as well. We have a Women Transforming Leadership program at Oxford. And what we're trying to do through that, and we talk to our MBA students, to our executive MBA students, and to the women executives who come about this, we're trying to say, play around with reinventing yourself and observe the statistics, but be in charge of your own destiny. There's a lot in this survey, I think, which is about visibility and productivity. It's about perception. And I think what business schools can do, and what we're trying to experiment with more and more through very experiential learning, and we use Shakespeare, where the difference between men and women often plays out in many of the plays, and women dress up as men and pretend to have a different identity. So we use experiential learning to help our own participants think about how they can control perceptions about themselves. So I think that there is a message that needs to come out from all of us who are involved in management education about the ability for men and women to think about their own destiny, and that's what management education is very much about. I think in the UK there have been some changes which have made a big difference to the way women can manage their careers, particularly after having children. So many public institutions give a whole year maternity leave, so you can take a whole year off. And employers often say that you can take somebody on in a year and give them a career opportunity, whereas taking somebody on for 3 months is very, very difficult. And then the person who's taken a whole year out can come back and still resume their career. And at Said Business School, we have, as indeed do many institutions in the UK, we have paternity leave. You can share, there's a new initiative in the UK where you can share paternity leave and maternity leave. And recently a member of staff said, I want to take paternity leave. How do I do it? And we all had to think, yes, how does this work? So we all had to scratch our head and work out how we did this, and how we evened it out between the two halves of the partnership, one of whom didn't work at the business school. So I think that as educators, we need to be very conscious of how we can use learning to help people think about themselves. As I say, men and women, but I think women can particularly benefit from this. And
Kathy,
then
could
also
I,
to be part of the
I just
debate.
wanted to, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to get, Francis brought up this issue of policy support. You've just given an example. If I could go back to China and just focus on that issue right now, Carol, maybe your other distinguished guests could explain, given the expectation that women would work full-time in China, how does it work in China on this transition, leaving work, coming back to work? What kind of policies are in place?
Hello, hi. Hi, Professor Snyder. This is Julia Zhu, and I'm class of 98 SOM, and my husband is also class of 98 SOM. We met at SOM, and we have SOM to
Romance
thank for.
at SOM.
We call it a school of marriage, well, in a way. So it's great. Love the school. And so, yeah, to respond to your question, yeah, actually, I've been running my own company. I ran my own company, and now I'm running a Phoenix live entertainment company. And we have, we face this sort of issue not every day, but very frequently. From the policy perspective, in China, in addition to the maternity leave, I believe it's 3 months, like actually 4 months, sorry. 4 months, and also 1 year, like 4 months, and then after the person came back for 1 year, the companies are not allowed to lay off that individual, the mother who's nurturing. Like there's 1 year, so that's from the policy perspective. There's a protection for the women on maternity leave and after return to workforce. And in the past, I experienced, we have, many, female employees, and they had babies along the way, because my own company, it was like 12 years history before we sold the company. And so I remember we just, because they're really excellent people to work with, and so we just need to, from company's perspective, we restructured how we set up the teams, and we gave more opportunities to new people or some, people from other departments, depending on, their functions. And then when the person returned, actually that person, can have, both, like options to return back to their original post or, start something new at the company, depending on, at the time what's available. So that we really turn around instead of, dwelling on, oh God, this person left and what should we do? And we need to have another person. We really try to turn around to make it, more creative and also more innovative in terms of placing the best talents, and really have a growth mindset to cultivate talents within our company. And actually the results are pretty good, because when the people, they return from their maternity leave, they were able to offer more opportunities than the time when they left. So it turned out to be good. And also we provided, training programs. We encouraged them to, to explore something they're interested in doing. So, I think for companies, if they want to stay competitive, this is probably could be a very good opportunity to restructure their talent pool.
Thank you very much.
I'll add a little bit.
I'll
add a little bit too.
I'm sorry, we're unfortunately,
okay.
am I correct, we're just about out of time? Yes. So I apologize, but we hope to continue the conversation. Before we close off, I wanted to get my colleague Christy Robb from Berkeley Haas just to give maybe any insight that let's keep it within the academic world. Is there anything working at Berkeley Haas, that you would share with us in terms of practice?
So So let me just reflect on one thing about this discussion, is that it is so focused on, the mother and it's the woman who has the baby and so on, but as we well know, it takes two to tango. And so I think what's sort of lost in all of this is what is the man's responsibility to his own children and to being a fully participatory part of that. And so I'd like to sort of change the conversation a little bit.
Well, the conversation needs to end, but
right.
So,
yeah. I
but
agree.
you've made.
So let me just say a couple things, which is that in business schools across the U.S., we have historically had 25-30% women, whereas what we've seen in medicine and in law, it's now 50-50. And business, we're clawing our way to have 40% women at Berkeley Haas. And so what does that mean? When our students, the women, leave our program, their salaries are about equal, men, women, but then we have this leakage that you've talked about over time. And part of the research that's been done by one of my colleagues, Laura Cray at Berkeley, looks at how women negotiate. And the bottom line is that women, companies need to look at pay equity for people at the same level, because if you look, women earn less than men, even if they're at the same job level. And so I think using academic research to highlight some of these and how we can change practices within business to recognize the contribution of women and understand that they negotiate differently, they do things differently, and so to create policies and other things so that we have pay equity, that we do things that are not just for women but also for men, paternity leave, etc. So I'll end on that note.
Perfect. Frances, do you have any closing comments for us?
Well, I hope everybody will look at the data and maybe think about how you could do a follow-up study in your country, and we can come back in a couple of years and have another hoopla. How about that?
That would be good. I wanted to apologize for the fact that we didn't get as much conversation from all of the important voices that we've assembled here, but I've learned a lot, and just wanted to express my deep gratitude to you, Frances, to Carol and your colleagues in Beijing, to our friends from around the network. And in terms of my own personal takeaway is a little bit of a confirmation of what I think is something that leaders need to keep in mind, and that is you need to develop a plan for people. Obviously it's plans for men and women, but if you don't have a plan for women, especially, I think you're going to miss opportunities, and the plan needs to address a lot of things. And maybe it involves, as Christy rightly pointed out, the husband or the significant other. And not all the plans work. It's not that you can plan and develop a plan for somebody and have it work out, but if you don't have a plan, then I think we're going to revert back to, oh, well, we have to hire X percent. And I personally don't like that as well. I don't think the outcomes are as good. But I think what we have here are insights also into how do things get tilted very early on. Mm-hmm. And that's also, I think, a takeaway for me in thinking about the environment. And it is amazing, isn't it, how quickly people come up with an assessment of somebody inside an organization. Things are going along, so-and-so and so-and-so, all we know is their name, a little bit, and then they get identified. Oh, that's a go-to person. That's somebody who's always there. They're early, and I think we have to maybe be more cognizant of that. Is that a potential implication? Last comment?
Time is money.
Thank you all very much. We'll have a short break.